Okay, so I have heat treated my blades. I made several of these Cowboy Daggers from various steels, and I just wanted to show you what they look like when they come out of heat treatment. First, this is 440C stainless, and this is wrapped in a stainless steel pouch before it goes into the hardening process at 1850 degrees, where it soaks at that temperature for 30 minutes. And then I draw temper it at 400 degrees for 2 hours. But you can see there's you see the finish on it there. And there's a little bit of discoloration, not really scale, but a little discoloration that I need to clean up. This is the 154 CM blade. And when I heat treat it, it's hardened at 1920 degrees and soaked for 20 minutes, and is tempered at 400 degrees. But it is air quenched, not oil quenched. But this is the one I was talking about. I tend to get the unique colors. And oftentimes I do not finish grind or polish these blades just so I can retain those colors. If I did grind it, I would grind all that off, and it would be the, you know, the silver metal looking finish on it. And then there's other stainless steels. This is the Sandvik. This is 19C27 that doesn't oil quench. And this, you know, after I oil quench it, it almost is like Damascus. There's a lot of loose, flaky black scale on it. So we'll have to clean this up. And believe it or not, this, once it's ground down to about 1,000 grit and then polished, this will get a bright, shiny, mirror polished finish on it. Okay, this is the 440C stainless steel blade as it looks after it's been heat treated and tempered. And before heat treating, I ground it to 220 grit. So I'm going to start back again with 220 grit and start cleaning it up, removing this discoloration, and start doing my final grinds. It's about it's the middle of February, and it's about 36 degrees in my shop right now, so hopefully I can keep my hands steady enough to do a good grind here. So first I'm going to do just kind of the surface grind, just to clean up the surface here a little bit. Here I'll show you the difference just after a few passes. That's what it was before. You see it's starting to clean up. Now, don't worry as much about the handle since that's going to be covered up anyway. And leaving it a little rough actually helps the handle scales attach better. But I'll take a few passes here just to knock some of the loose stuff off of it. One of the tricks for doing your surface grind this way is you really have to keep it moving. If I pause or hesitate at any point, it'll make a divot in this blade. So you want to keep a good, smooth, flat surface. You have to keep it moving. Same thing goes with your blade grinds. You want to keep that blade moving across the wheel. Okay, now that we got the surface cleaned up a little bit, I can go ahead and start working on the grinds, clean those up. And I'll also start thinning them down a little bit more. I'll leave them a little bit thick before heat treating. It just reduces the chance of the blade warping when it's in heat treatment. These come out nice and straight. So now I can start working on the grinds. Now, once this blade has been hardened, it doesn't grind nearly as easy as it did with my rough grinds when it was still in the annealed state. The steel is much harder now, so it's going to remove metal at a much slower rate. Now, after every pass, I look at what I did, and I can see the track that wheel made on the blade. And I can see, if I was too far toward the edge and didn't get all the way up to the upper line of my grind, I need to bring that blade up on the wheel a little bit, let it grind a little deeper into the blade. I just wanted to show you a couple of things here. This is a critical stage of grinding. This is my 220 grit belt after heat treating. So this is where I want to really watch a couple of critical areas. Number one, I want to make sure that I get, I'm thinning my blade down closer to my final thickness.
but I want to make sure this thickness is even all the way down. And you want to do this while you're on your 220 grit belt, because as you get to the finer belts, it's going to be removing much less metal, so it's harder to make corrections. So, you know, I'm pretty even here. I'm a little thin on the thinner on the tip than I am up here, but I can, you know, grind that down a little bit more. You know, if I see I've got a thick spot, I can slow down on the wheel, spend a little more time on that area and thin it down to where everything's a uniform, even thickness all the way down. We'll make sure everything's straight. Make sure my grind lines are straight. I want to check here where my grinds begin, make sure these are even. Not only even across this way, but I want to see that they're even on depth. That means I took the same amount of metal off of one side of the blade as I did off of the other. So that's another important place to watch. So these are things I really want to look for at this stage and make the corrections that I need to make before going on to a finer belt. Now here is the 19C27 stainless steel blade. And you see it's got a much dirtier looking finish after it came out of heat treating, because as you saw in the video, when this came out of heat treating, it went into oil to quench it. And that leaves a little scale on the blade. But I just wanted to show you this one while I'm still on the 220 grit belt, just how this cleans up. As you can see, I've got a pretty fair amount of pitting I need to get out of this, so this is going to take a little work. In fact, I think I'm going to go back to a 120 grit belt to get some of this rough stuff off of it, and then I'll come back to the 220. Now that I've got the flat surfaces cleaned up with 120, I'll go ahead and make a few passes on the grind, and then I'll go back to the 220 grit belt. Okay, here's your 19C27 steel after I've cleaned it up with the 120 grit belt. Okay, rather than me spending a lot of time showing you me grinding blades, which I've done on a number of my videos, I just went ahead and did the 220 grit, 320 grit, 600, and I just finished with an A16 Trizac belt here, which is about 800 grit. So here's where we are. This is the 440C stainless. And this is the 19C27 Sandvik stainless steel, the Swedish stainless steel. And these will finish differently. They look about the same now, but once we get them polished, I think you'll be able to see that this has a very different finish than the 440C. But I am going to mirror polish both of these, which will be my next step before I make the guards and the handles. Okay, I'm going to start mirror polishing my blades now, and I'm starting off with a sewn cotton wheel, and I'm going to put a little green compound on that, or white compound on that to start off. I will finish up with the green compound. This is a brand new wheel, and it'll get a little more solid, get a little harder after it wears in with some compound, but right now it's fairly soft, which makes it a little more dangerous as it's a little more likely to grab the blade. But, starting to polish up nicely. I still see quite a few scratches I need to get out of it, but still quite a ways to go. Now I'm finishing up with the green compound. Okay, we finished ground and polished. I did two of these blades. This one's a 440C stainless, and this is the Sandvik 19C27 stainless. And I'm just going to finish one of these knives in the rest of the video, but I wanted to show you a difference here. And I didn't spend a lot of video time on the polishing process. I already have another video about how I mirror polish my blades, so I didn't see any reason to repeat that here. But I did want to show you, and I'm not sure how well the video will show it, but the difference, the way these finish. Here you can see the 440C has a very smooth finish. It really polishes very nicely. The Sandvik steels, all of them I've tried, have a little bit of a
almost kind of a wrinkly, almost an orange peel type finish to them. It's very subtle. You really have to look for it. But there you can see it pretty well. And I really don't know what it is about these Sandvik steels. That seems to be a characteristic of every one I've tried. It's not bad, but it is. I am just showing you how different steels will polish differently. Now on this blade, I did do some file work on the handle that I really didn't cover in the video. This is what I call my arrowhead pattern, and not difficult. I mean, it's just a straight cut across this way. I put a little notch here with a small round file, and then I take a round file and just carve out this triangular portion right here. Okay, we have our blade ready for the next step, which will be the guard. And in this case, I'm going to make the guard out of a piece of 1/8 inch thick brass. This is 1 inch wide. So, and it's going to rest right up against these little shoulders on the blade. So basically we're going to take a section of this brass, cut a slot in it, and it's going to slide up over the blade until it gets to that point. So I need to figure out how wide I want to make this guard. And I don't have a set rule for this. I just kind of eyeball it. I just want it to stick out a little bit past the blade. So I'm going to say right about there. That's probably a little wider than I want, but I can always grind it down and narrow it down. Now I need to know my center line on here, and I know this is a 1 inch wide piece of brass, so I can just set my square here at a 1/2 inch. And that's the center where I want my slot to be. So I need to know my starting and ending points for the slot. So I can just lay my blade on here, like so. Get it pretty much centered. And then just mark either side of the tang. And that'll show me where I want my slot to start and end. Now I won't cut this excess off until I've finished milling it and everything, just because it's easier to handle when it's all still in one big bar. So now I need to know how wide to cut that slot. So we'll measure the blade. And it's 9/64 of an inch, which is just slightly wider than 1/8 of an inch. So I can cut my slot with a 1/8 inch bit, and then on my mill just widen it out to 9/64. Now I'll use that starter hole is just a starting point for my 1/8 inch milling bit. Okay, I have my 1/8 inch starter hole, and I've got a 1/8 inch end mill mounted in my milling machine here. So I'll just find the center of that starter hole, and then we'll start milling our slot. So I'm just going to take a series of small bites, cut that slot, and I'm going to stop just short of that upper line, and I'll finish that out with a hand file. You want to be careful not to take too much brass off and make it too wide. It's real easy to take off. It's real hard to put it back on. Okay, there we have our slot. So basically I'm looking for 14/100ths of an inch. And then I can finish it out with a hand file to make sure I get the perfect fit. And our slot right now is right about 13/100ths of an inch. Actually, I think I pretty much got it on the one pass there. I'm 0.140. Looks pretty good. Now you can see the slot's not quite wide enough, which is fine, because these ends of these slots are round. And I'm going to take a square file and square those up, and then I can file it just to the point where it's just a real good fit over the end of this tang. Okay, I'm just going to take a little 1/8 inch square file and square up these round ends of these slots here. The other thing I do is I cut a little ramp at about a 45-degree angle on one side, and that just makes it sit up nice and square on the shoulders of that tang. And that's because those shoulders are not absolutely square. They're a little bit rounded themselves. There you can see I've squared that slot up, and I've cut this little ramp. that will go right up against the shoulder on the blade. And like I said, these aren't perfectly square. They're slightly rounded. So that lets that guard kind of go over that rounded part. So now we just have to do the other end. There you can see the ends of that slot are now square. We should be pretty close. Okay, it's a little snug, so I need to take a little bit off the sides here. I always like to do my final fitting with hand filing. I just get a better, tighter fit that way, it seems like. Okay, looks like we've got a pretty good fit here. Now, one thing I like to do, even though I'm going to mess this up again when I solder it, I like to go ahead and sand it and polish the guard before I solder it. It just seems like it makes it a little easier to clean up afterwards. Now that I have my guard cut to size and I've got it all polished up, now I just need to cut it off to length. So I'm just going to measure an equal distance from the end of the slot, both directions. And we're just about 1/4 of an inch this way. So I'll come back 1/4 of an inch the other side and mark it. A little trick Gil Hibben taught me, and I don't know why it works. I guess it just helps clean things better. But I put a little bit of lighter fluid on there before I start warming it up. I'll burn that lighter fluid off. Once it's a little bit warm, I'll put some of my Stay Clean liquid flux on there. And then I'll solder it with the Stay Bright silver solder, which is a low temperature silver solder. It warmed it up a little bit, so we'll put our flux on. And I'll warm that up until the flux starts to turn brown. And that's about when the solder will be ready to flow. Okay, we got a pretty good looking solder joint. See, I did get a little bit of solder come through on the back side, so I know I got a good strong joint all the way around. So now I just need to clean this up a little bit. One of the tools I use for that is a graver, which is just a piece of square bar stock, brass bar stock that I've ground kind of a chisel edge on. And that'll let me get right in here and clean out this excess. Now with this graver being brass, it's not going to scratch that blade. Just like that. Now I'm just going to take a little bit of 600 grit sandpaper, clean up a little bit of this splash I had on it here. Okay, I've got the excess solder cleaned up. Got a nice square joint here at the rear, so the handle will butt up against the guard nicely. I've lightly sanded the front of it. So I'm just going to give it one more polish, and then I think we'll be ready to put handles on it.
Okay, so we've got the blade polished up, got the guard on it. So now we're ready to put handles on it. And I'm going to use buffalo horn on this one. I've taken my buffalo horn handle scales and I've sanded the back side to make sure I got a good flat surface where it meets the tang. And I've also squared up one end to make sure I get a good flush fit against the guard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one scale and epoxy it to the handle tang. And then when that's set up, I will drill this side for the handle pins. And the epoxy is not so much for adhesion as it is for just a good waterproof seal between the handle scale and the tang. I've taped up my blade just to keep from getting it scuffed up and keep from getting glue on it. Make sure my tang is good and clean. And I'll take one of my scales and make sure it's good and clean. I'm just using a brake cleaner like you can get at any auto parts store. It cleans up everything real good, makes sure there's no oil or grease on it, and doesn't leave any residue. just want a nice thin layer of epoxy. You don't want a real thick layer. Okay, I like to use these ratchet clamps like you can get at home stores. And in a case like this, I want to make sure I've got it butted up good against the guard. So one thing I can do is I can take a long clamp and clamp it like so to keep it pushed up against the guard. So now we just need to let that sit for a couple of hours, and then I should be able to drill it, and then we can proceed with the other side. Okay, so our epoxy is set up on this side of the handle. So before going any further, I'm just going to go ahead and trim this a little closer to the tang with my bandsaw. There we go. And that's just going to make it a little easier to make sure I've got it centered when I put the other side on. I'll be able to see it better. And, you know, it's just a little less stuff I have to grind and cut away afterwards. I've already got 3/16 inch holes in the tang. So I'm just going to run my 3/16 bit back through those holes and all the way through my handle material. So now I have 3 holes that are perfectly aligned because the handle cannot move. So I'm going back down through that hole from the first handle scale we glued up. Now I need to countersink these holes for the loveless bolts. And to do that, I'm going to use a special bit. And these holes are just going to be to center that bit. And I'm going to drill a countersink about halfway through the handle scale. So there'll still be a shoulder for the bolt to grab to and clamp these scales to the tang. Now you have to be careful with these loveless bolts. You want to drill deep enough into your handle material so that you get a good deep seating of the end of the loveless bolt, but you don't want to drill all the way through the scale because you need part of this for the bolt to get a hold of and press against, and that's what's going to clamp these bolts, these scales, to the tang. Although it probably isn't really necessary, I like to mix up another little batch of epoxy and glue these bolts into place too, just a little extra security to make sure that they can't turn after it's all finished. And I'm just going to take a toothpick and put a little bit of epoxy into the recess of these counter bores that I made. Now then, the loveless bolt, you just take the screw part with one of the brass collars, put it in from one side, and it sits down in that counter bore. Then you take the threaded brass collar for the other side and just screw it down. And since we had everything perfectly aligned, it's going to go right into that recess on the other side. Then when you tighten this down, it's going to draw that collar in on this side. Like that. Getting a little epoxy on the threads isn't going to hurt anything either. It's just another measure that's going to keep it from ever coming loose. Now I'll let that dry overnight again, just to make sure everything's set up real good. Then I'll probably go ahead and trim some of this excess handle material off on the bandsaw rather than grind it, because believe me, nothing stinks like buffalo horn when you're drilling or grinding it. It's just matted hair, really, and it smells like it. Grind these pins down slowly because they get very hot, and you don't want to get them so hot that they're going to burn the handle material. So I'll grind a little bit, let it cool while I grind on the edges or something like that. I've got this little bit of buffalo horn right up against the guard here, and I really didn't want to grind up against the guard. So I'm going to just take a little triangular file and make a cut in with that where I've got more control and I can feel it. When I start getting through it, then I should be able to just chip that piece off, and then I can sand it down smooth. Like that. Well, there you have it. That's the Carter Cowboy Dagger. Buffalo horn handle, brass guard, brass pins, little arrowhead filework on the spine, 440C stainless steel, mirror polished. That's how I do it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.